Okay, for this part, we're actually going to do the foundation piece. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I'm probably going to put up, if I haven't done it already, on eCentennial. That basically gives you the basics of how to create your site. So let's take a look at what foundation is. Okay. So we're going to cover what is foundation, how do you install it, and what's this 12-column grid thing anyway, at least today. We're going to talk a little bit more about it as we go on. There's a lot to cover, and it's hard for me to cover a whole API or framework in one go. It's just too hard. There's just too many pieces to it. Okay. So again, it's a front-end responsive design framework. I've asked you for responsive design with your first assignment, and this is definitely an emerging technology, or if you want to talk about instead of emerging technologies like a commonplace thing now, you need to know about it from a front-end perspective. Responsive web design, RWD, if you will. And there's many different responsive frameworks that are out there. I've kind of shared a couple with you on eCentennial. One of them is this responsive web design front-end stuff with Foundation from Zurb. If you're a designer, you're going to love all the things you can do. It's very little coding to be done. You can do it all with classes, so very little coding from a developer perspective. It's all CSS classes, but we need to install everything for it to all work properly. Again, it supports Chrome, Firefox, Safari, even Internet Explorer 9, but there's no support for IE 7 or 8. And like I told you before, I'm not really targeting those in this class, or any class that we do together, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. So it comes with all the CSS and JavaScript and everything else that you need to make it go, and it uses this 12 column grid system in order for you to create this responsive web. Now the current version it says here on my slides is 5.4, but actually 5.5 has been released, which is if you go to Foundation now, you can download the latest version. So let's do that. Let's go and download the latest version of Foundation. So again, I'm here on the Mac side, but it doesn't matter if you're on the Mac or Windows, same thing. I'm going to go to Foundation, and the site link is foundation.zurb.com, right? I'm going to click on Download Foundation, and when I do that, it's going to take me to this little Foundation link. If you notice, you can do a customized download where you only download certain elements of the Foundation framework. And by the way, Foundation is a JavaScript library, right? That's what it is, that we can use in order for it to, for things to go, for things to work. So you need JavaScript to make all the interactivity happen, except in this particular case, you're not writing it. We're using a library. Instead of reinventing the wheel right now, there's this library that we're going to be able to use. I can also download the essentials, which is not everything. Includes typography and the grid and blah, blah, but not everything. And there's also, you can use Sass and SCSS in order for you to have customized CSS and style sheet control. We're not going to go there right now because that's just an advanced way of doing things. So let's stick with this and download everything. And when we download, we click the download button. It gives us a zip file, which I've already downloaded. And I'm just going to kill this because we don't need this web font kit anymore. And the web font, the kit is called Foundation 5.5. This is what it is, and it comes with a few folders, right? It comes with humans.txt, an index.html page, a robots.txt page, and all the required JavaScript to make Foundation work, right? Now you need jQuery for Foundation. You need it, right? You don't need Modernizer or placeholder.js. You don't need these things for you to make Foundation work, but you do need, at the minimum, jQuery, right? Now, if you're using TypeScript and you want to make jQuery work, you have to download and install a type definition file. For us, for now, we're not going to use TypeScript or even JavaScript today. Today, we're going to focus on getting Foundation up and running to give you that responsive framework, right? Then there's the Foundation folder that includes all of your Foundation methods and classes, along with an unmodified version of Foundation that you can go in there and modify if you so wish. So if you're a developer and you want to add things into the Foundation framework, or you want to modify the foundation framework, this is the way to do it. So these are the folders that you get. So you get a vendor folder, you get the minified version of foundation, you get your CSS folder, and by the way, we will use this normalized.css file. That's the right thing for us to do, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. And a minified as well as an unminified version of the CSS, the style sheets, or the style guide, if you will, for the foundation framework. So these are all the things that you get when you download Foundation. How do I incorporate those into my website? Well, if we remember correctly, and I'm on the PC side now, if I've got my Foundation framework, just go date modified for now. Here it is. Oh, this is Foundation 5.4. I'll go with me. Here it is. So I want to incorporate, I'm just going to stop debugging for a second because you can't do any drag and drop unless you're not debugging. I'm going to get rid of some of these placeholder images. I don't need these things. But I want to create my Foundation framework. I want to make a boilerplate, so every time I create a Foundation website, I'm good to go, right? Well, how do I do this? In Visual Studio, it's a drag and drop affair. However, you got to do it from your File Explorer into Visual Studio, or you can add an existing item. I recommend this is the better way. So again, I definitely want humans.txt, so I'm going to grab that along and put this in there. And if you notice, it goes in there. We'll talk about what humans.txt is in a second. Same thing with robots.txt. Does anyone know what those two things are? SEO stuff, right? Search engine optimization stuff. So what it does, it looks at your site and says, is this site created by a human, right? Who made this thing? And for robots, you're going to give some instructions for robots or for bots that look around the web and search your site. We're not going to do much with it in our class because in our class we're not going to really explore SEO. Doesn't make any sense. It's kind of out of scope, but we're going to include them just because. Here's our JavaScript. I want to definitely include my JavaScript in there, but I'm not going to put it just in my scripts folder. I'm going to put it in my lib folder. So I'm going to grab my foundation.min.js and drag and drop it into my lib folder. There it is, right? And I'm going to do the same thing with my vendor. In my vendor folder, I have jQuery, and I want to kind of drag and drop that into my lib folder as well, because I need jQuery to run my foundation, right? The rest, not really necessary. Let's leave FastClick and jQuery cookie and modernizer and all that stuff out for now, because we don't need it. We could certainly include it, and it gives you, the package includes all your vendor stuff, gives you the most popular or common things to add in with Foundation. But I do need these two things. The next thing I need is in my Foundation folder, in my vendor folder, in my CSS folder, I do need my CSS. Foundation won't work properly without its own CSS. So I need a couple things. I need normalized.css. We'll talk about what that is. And I also need my foundation.min.css. Right? So I need those things. So I have in my CSS now that I've dragged out of my folder, I have my foundation.min.css, my normalized.css, my app.css, which I created. I've got a couple of other things, foundation.min.js and jQuery.js. Those are the things I need in there. And you know what? I need my own JS file just in case, and just because we're making our boilerplate. So I'm going to go to add, and I'm going to say JavaScript file, and I'm going to call this app.js, right? Because this is just us. This is for me. If I want to make any other modifications, my app.js is going to go right at the bottom. Anything else, any other custom functions I want to add in, it's going to go at the bottom of my file, right? Okay, so lots of files, lots of stuff that I've added in. And let me just make sure I'm not missing anything for it to function. If I take a look at the index.html site that comes with it, and if I just double click, I get what Foundation will look like. So this is the basis. This shows you all the different features of Foundation. They give you examples of everything here, right? And if you actually look at this site, if I minify it like this, it shows you that how it responds, responsive design reflows our content across different viewport sizes. So if you notice, this has a reflow. Once I get to a breakpoint here, see, from here to here, right? Our design changes. That's what responsive design is. It reflows across our content across different viewport sizes. Okay? And if you notice, they give you examples here. So if you actually were to look at this document, this index.html that comes with Foundation 5, it kind of demonstrate how things are done. But we don't need this right now. The only thing that I would want to look at this document for is for setup, if I was going to use it at all. And for me to do that, I mean, I could simply look at it in another program, and I'm going to use Sublime for now, just because I have that running alongside of Visual Studio, because I like to use both. Sometimes a second IDE or something else, a text editor like Text Wrangler on the Mac, or even TextEdit, edit some kind of thing. So I can look at it aside from just the actual file. So this is what Sublime would look like. And if you notice, from a setup perspective, because we need all these things, right? This is the file that comes right with Foundation. It has the Foundation CSS and Modernizer. Again, I'm telling you that you don't need Modernizer. And it doesn't include any other CSS. This is cool, but I recommend to you that you're going to do this. You're going to normalize your CSS. And what normalizing CSS does is it says, I want to remove all browser-specific built-in styles, because each browser has their own style sheet, right? I want to take all that stuff out and normalize everything. That's the first thing I want to do whenever I do responsive design. And there's a couple of things you can use to do that. There's actually a site that provides something called reset.css that you can download if you don't want to do it through Foundation, or this normalize.css. So I recommend we do that. So let's add that in first. So here's my CSS section, and I've got normalize right here that I got from the vendor piece of Foundation. I'm going to drag and drop this above my own CSS. And why does it have to be above and not below mine? Why would mine be the last one? Anybody? It's the I'm saying, what is mine the last one? My last one. What am I? Why am I? First of all, I want to use it all, right? I want to use all the Foundation CSS and everything else, and I want to modify. Because remember, cascading style sheets work like the last change to my element is the one that it's going to take. It's specificity. That's specificity principle, right? So if I've got a bunch of changes to my elements or whatever, and then I add my changes in the last place, the last change that's made is the one that's taken. So that means my change is going to be applied. If I put my CSS at the top and then I normalize everything, my changes are gone, right? And the same thing if I use Foundation. Foundation is going to take over, right? So it's normalized first, then foundation.min.css, which I'm going to drag it under normalize, and then my app.css. That's how it should go. Right. Now, even without installing that Foundation framework, if I just include an h1 tag, right, with hello world, okay, here's my hello world h1 tag, my headline, and I run it, now that I've included the CSS, you notice all of a sudden I've got style that I wouldn't have had because Foundation adds in its own style right away, right? So that's why my hello world is the size that it is. I'm just going to go back to this for a second. Okay, so I've just added in my Foundation stuff. Now I need to, in the JavaScript section, let's go back and look at my Sublime text for a second, because it's important to note that I have this, the setup here, right? Inside my JavaScript section, which is normally at the bottom of my site now, I'm just going to scroll all the way to the bottom, right? I've got jQuery first, and then I have my Foundation, and then in a script, I'm calling my Foundation framework in its own script. And then underneath that would be my script. If I had my own JavaScript functionality I wanted to add into the to my site. Like if I wanted something if I want to create my own event handler, or if I want to do some other custom JavaScript stuff, it would go at the last place again. So then I can take advantage of jQuery and all the Foundation stuff. Okay, so I need this stuff. Again, I'm going to drag and drop, right? on my side. So I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer. I'm going to stop debugging, and I'm going to say I'm going to go to my library, right? And the first thing I'm going to put in is jQuery, because that's the first thing that's going to come into my library. And then the second thing I'm going to put in is my foundation, right? I need to kick off foundation by using a script tag. And by the way, I could do this in my own JavaScript file, right? But for now, let's just put it like this. So I'll use the same kind of thing that we have in our, I'm using my jQuery. I'm going to use document.foundation. As long as things are good, when I start typing stuff in here, and I do, I'm using the document model, and I say .foundation. If I can find foundation, which is good, I'm good to go, right? So it's a class. I'm calling the actual class itself. There we go. So once I've done that, I've called foundation. That's going to call up the main method that's going to launch the functionality that's behind foundation. After I've done this, then I put in my own JavaScript file underneath, because my JavaScript file now will have take advantage of everything else. Yeah, I thought so. I need a semicolon. I don't need one. It's recommended. Okay, so now I haven't done anything. I just got a hello world, and if I press play just to test it out here again, again I've got my hello world and there's no added effects because I really haven't added in all the required classes to foundation to make it go. Okay, but at least it's functioning without an error. If I was going to test out my app.js file, which is right here, right? If I was going to test it out to see if I have access to jQuery, the best test would be something like this: $, and then document, right? And if I put dot, and if I can get ready, I know I have access to it. But guess what? I'm not getting it. Why is that? Anybody? I need a reference. I need a reference to that document for JavaScript, and in Visual Studio we require references, right? So there's a couple ways you can do this. I'm just going to erase this right now. In Visual Studio, we go back to our library, right? As an example, I can right-click and add a reference file. Right now, there's different ways that it can be done. If I go to my project and I go add, it'll say add a reference.js IntelliSense file, which is what we're looking at. If I go yes and I add it in, automatically by itself the reference.js file, this is a Visual Studio thing by the way, it's not another thing, it's just for Visual Studio, right? It creates this reference file that tells me where my foundation path is, where my jQuery is, and where my app.js file is. Okay, I'm gonna save that, and that's in my lib folder. It's in my scripts folder itself. That's where it lives. Okay, I don't have to reference this reference.js file. It's only for IntelliSense. Okay, let's check that out and see if how that works now. So I'm going to save everything, right? And now when I start typing, is this enough? $document, right? Dot. Hey, I'm still not getting it. What does this mean? Huh? Even though I've made a reference to my file, right? I haven't linked it, right? I haven't made it linked to anything. If I'm lazy and if I wanted to create a reference, I could also just do one of these, right? I can drag and drop my reference path right in my file, right? And then from here, I now should have access to document, and I can tell you I do already, dot, and then a series of different things like ready, right? Why? IntelliSense isn't good at understanding different, right? With vanilla JavaScript, it's not good at understanding libraries unless we add in reference files like this, or references to them, right? Now I'm not going to do anything with my app.js so far. I'm just telling you, if you're going to use jQuery for your website, for your final website, for your assignment number 1, and you want to make it all the code hinting work without giving you an error in Visual Studio, you need to have a reference file or some kind of reference that points to jQuery or Foundation or whatever you're using. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need it. I'm going to save it because I don't really need to put anything in there. I just wanted to mention that as the way it works. Okay, so we're good to go here. We're ready to add in the rest of Foundation. Let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. For you guys who are following along and don't have the same version as I do, I'm just going to go quickly into Team Explorer, go into Changes, and kind of put in added Foundation site structure to template. Commit, and I'm also going to go and sync my changes. Okay, so now on GitHub again, if I refresh, and inside my folder I have all my stuff that I've just done, right? Just in case you guys want to follow along or see what I've done. Okay, so let's go back. So again, we've downloaded everything. I said choose everything with Foundation. Again, the things that you want to add in, I mean, I say you can add in these 3 folders, JavaScript, image, and CSS. You can add them all in there. Image is really a placeholder and doesn't have anything in there. JavaScript is where we have our other things. Again, you can choose to use Modernizer or not if you're testing functionality in across different devices. We're not. So we're not going to include that function. Certainly you can. It's definitely best practices. And now that we've done that, we have this site structure. And again, I put Modernizer in there so you know what it looks like. This is the only script that we put in the head of your document if you were going to use it, right? But the rest is this is what your stuff should pretty much look like, your boilerplate. Okay? Let's talk about the 12-column grid. So how do we, now that we have the framework in there, how do we take advantage of the framework? What is this framework we speak of anyway? We haven't even seen it in action, really. So the basics are we need to add a div element, some kind of element, with a class of row. That is almost like our wrapper. It wraps everything up, right? So that's the first outer element, row. So let's do that. So in here, I'm going to create I like my hello world, but I want to wrap it up in, let's say, some kind of header or a div tag, right? And by the way, there's different ways of doing this. If I want to make it so that it has a class of row with Zen coding, all I have to do is this, div dot, and then a class of row, right? And it does all that typing for me, right? And then I just drag and drop this stuff inside of there because that's what I have, right? Hello world. So as soon as I do that, let's see, does it make any changes? I've only just added a class of row. Hey, look, it moved it across. So automatically, even just with a class of row with a container, it's moved my hello world into my document a little bit. Now, in terms of functionality, take a look at it. This is what it's done. And I haven't done anything. All I've done is added a class of row, right? So it moves my hello world and changes the size at a breakpoint. Look, here's medium, here's small. Medium, small. It's changed it already just by that one command, right? Okay. That's the first thing. And then after we do that, we want to specify how many columns we want to add in, we want to use for this specific section. Okay? So we create another div tag, another container area. It could be a header. Like for example, in my header, I want my my header section to have X number of rows that I take up. I specify that. Let's do that. So go back in here, and inside my row, right, I want to add in a header element, right? So I say header, and now I got to say I want to add in a number of columns. So let's say large, right, 8 in my header. Actually, we'll make it large 12. Large 12 columns, right? See my shorthand? Large 12 columns. And inside my header, I want to put my hello world, right? Now this is another place I can put my nav bar or whatever, but for now I want to put my hello world in my header. Okay, so all I'm doing is formatting. I'm formatting my content, by using the classes that come with Foundation. Right? So respond, and now it's there. It's 12. There's no difference yet. Right? I can also specify in my header what happens in the small, in case of a small thing, if I have a small screen. For example, let's say I want to have a space for my logo in my header, right? A placeholder for my logo. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back into my site here, and instead of specifying in my header, I use all 12 columns, right? I don't want to have that. I want to maybe further go down and say, well, here's my header. My header is going to use 12 columns, right? Or let's say 8 columns and when it's large, right? But I also want to have some kind of aside, right? Where that's going to hold my logo, right? And I want my aside, I'm just going to type it in here so I show you what it is. My aside is going to be large 4 columns, right? And this is all inside of my row right now, right? So here's my aside, right? And if I've done it wrong, it's okay because it's gonna help me. It's already complaining. It says, hey Tom, something's wrong down here. When declaring less than 12 columns, the last one has to have the end class. I have to put the end class in here. And I understand why it's happening. So just bear with me while we do this together, right? So here I'm going to put some kind of placeholder image. So I'm going to use place. And maybe my image, I want my logo to be 150 by 150, right? So here's my logo. And inside my header, I have 8 columns. And now let's take a look at what this thing looks like. Right? So here's large. 8 columns are taken up for my hello world. 4 columns are for my logo. Right? What about when I go to small? Oops. What about when I go to small? Right? When I'm small, I want my placeholder, my this logo. I want my logo to be take up 6 columns, right? And my header to take up the other 6 columns. So I can do that by adding in small. So I go small. When I'm in the small screen, I want 6 columns. And the same thing goes with down here. I can say small 6. What this does is, when I run it again in the 12 column grid, I'm just going to kill this one. This is good when I'm large, right? When I go small, now it's equal. There's 6 and 6. So now I'm telling it how to reflow. It's not just about responsive design. I'm specifically telling it how many columns I'm going to have in terms of total space. So this is how many columns I have when I'm large. When I go small, I want to divide the columns separately. I know this is looking like, this is like watching paint peel sometimes, but you need to do it. So what I'm asking you is, as I'm doing this kind of stuff, follow along. It'll make it easier to follow and better to understand. Okay, see how there's a break. So as I'm in small, I go to medium, nothing happens, right? Everything's the same in medium. And when I go large, boom, now I have more of my text, 8 columns instead of 4 columns, or instead of 6 columns. Again, to compare what was done here with the original file, if we were unsure of how this would work, right? Here is an example of what they did. Welcome to Foundation, large 12 columns. That means it took all the 12 columns for us, right? It's not centered, it's just big, right? Then we have another row, and inside that row, we have another section that's large 12 columns. But inside this division, we have another division, right? Or a div tag with large 4 columns, medium 4 columns, and here's large 4. And if you notice, this is all inside another row, right? Now remember, the way it works is this. I have 12 columns. Each of my divisions, or my sections, has to share those 12 columns, and it has to equal to 12 at the end. Okay? So that's how the responsive framework works. So for example, 6 and 6 for small is equal to 12, right? 12 columns in this row. each row, I can have many rows, right? But for the columns have to be spread out across the row, right? So for this particular design pattern right here that I'm using, my aside is taking 6 columns when it's small and 4 columns when it's large. 4 and 8 is 12. Here's the large. 6 and 6 is 12 for the small. I can have another row for my content, and I'm just going to call that, I even call that content. Let's just go div, and I'm going to give it an ID of content. So here's my content section, right? And you know what? Let's go back. That's the great thing. I'm going to give it a class of row, right? So here's my row again, and inside my row, I want to have a couple of different things here, a couple of articles, right? I want to have another aside, right? Here's my aside. And next to it, I want to have an article. I'm using the plus. I'm tabbing over. I've got an aside and an article, right? Now I can decide inside my aside how many rows, how many columns, my aside needs, and which side it's going to be. Right now it's going to be on my left side. If I want to make it on the right side, I can just do the article first. So here's my article, here's my aside. If my aside is going to be on the left, my article first, I want to give my article the most number of rows. So I'm going to give it like, let's say 7 rows. So I'm going to do a class. I can type it in here like this, or I can use a shorthand. And then large 7, right? Okay. And for this one, for my aside, what's left over from 12? Well, there's 5. 7 and 5 is 12. So I need to give it class, right? Large 5 columns, right? So I have 7 columns and 5 columns for my content. Here's my article. I want to put some lorem text in there, so I'm going to go lorem 300, right? And if it doesn't work, maybe it's lorem 200. That'll work. None of those work. Won't work anymore. Probably disabled it somewhere, and that's okay. Yes.
Are we expected to use Foundation for our website?
No. I'm giving you Foundation, but I'm going to let you use whatever responsive web design framework you want to use. For example, Bootstrap is another great example of a framework to use, right? What I don't want you to use, like I said before in the first class, is please don't use WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, or another CMS to do this, okay? This is not something you're going to download and install. I want you to do this from scratch, kind of thing. So yes, but you can use, if you don't want to use Foundation because you don't like it, and you want to use Bootstrap because there's more functionality, all the power to you. Okay?
Yeah.
What was that?
No, I don't know.
Okay. I'm saying Bootstrap is another one, right? Yeah, so if I want to, let's quit lorem. None of it's working right now. I know why, too. So I got to save and come back, close it up and come back.
So why is that coding working?
It's because I've got to close. Sometimes what happens is a bit of a glitch when it comes to, and I've also, because I'm still debugging, that's part of it. So I just close, what I do is I close it down as a workaround and come back. And then if I want to put in things like should work now, if I go lorem 50, right? And sometimes it doesn't work. And it's because of the way I've got my, my tags and everything set up, which is perfectly fine, right? I'm in a class. Now, if I want to do this, I could certainly put this all together. Like if I go pics, this is where I would want my text and everything else to work, like pics.
Well, I don't think there's
50.
a hyphen. There's no hyphen after you type lorem. So
Sure.
lorem 200 goes together without the hyphen.
Let's see if you're right. Yep. You sure are. That's probably what it was. I was typing it wrong. What I want to do, though, is inside my article, I want to put, like I said, lorem 200 is about right. And if you look up, there's this whole block of text now that I got with lorem 200, right? Just to test out how it looks, right? And in my aside, I want to put like, I don't know, lorem 100, right? So here we go. Here's some placeholder values here, so I can look at it, right?
So what are you typing?
Lorem, LOREM, and then a number of words you want.
And then
Tab. If your Zen coding is working, you should get that. Did you get it?
man, if this computer's done.
Well, if you don't have Visual Studio Web Essentials in front of you, then that's why it won't work, right? You have to use it only works with Web Essentials, right? So even if it's as update 3, you have to download and install Web Essentials or Emmet, right? That's the other way to do it with another browser, another IDE. Okay, if I run this now, and again, you can type in your own code. This is the way you can test it. You can say, well, here's 12 columns here, right? I've got 4 columns here and 8 columns here, and now I've got 7 columns here and 5 columns here. And when I kind of go this way, right, I've got these two that kind of compress one on top of the other because I haven't specified what they do, right? And one thing I probably need in here is a title so you can see the break between one section and the next, right? So let's put in some tags, H1 tags. Actually, let's just take that out for a second just to make it a little easier, right? There we go. And in here, oops, let's try that one more time. In here, what I want to do is put a p tag, right, with lorem 200, right? And if I type it in there, it'll put it inside a paragraph tag, right? And if I want to, you can go further. I really want some kind of headline text, so an H2 tag, let's say, right, with a p tag and lorem 200. And my H2 tag, I want to say, this is my main article, right? And then I'm just going to go to the end and press tab, right? And then if you notice, there's a problem because my H2 tag contains my p tag. I don't want that to happen. So I can undo that change, right? Because what I want to do is, here's my main article, right? And then I want to do my p tag. So let's just do that. Let's just go, because this is an addition. It's the same level. So actually, instead of lower, I want to do plus, like this. And by the way, you can use things like brackets to specify what it's going to look like, right? Better? And the same thing goes with this one. I want an H3 tag, right? H3 with, this is my aside, right? And then a plus, and I'm going to open bracket, a p tag with lorem 100, right? And then go to the end and press tab. And then you have your H3 tag. All I'm doing here is speeding things up. You can do the same thing by just typing in some gobbledygook. Or there's some really cool lorem ipsum sites that you can grab stuff and drag and drop into your site as well. But that's why I recommend getting Visual Studio Web Essentials. It helps you create your stuff really, really quickly. So if I refresh, right, then here's my aside. This is my main article. Here's my hello world, right, as an example. If I skip in there, you can see that the main article and my aside go on top of each other for medium, right? And if I go for small, right, they scrumble up in here too, right? This is my aside, and this is my hello world. But what if I don't want them to kind of come on top of each other, right? I want them to stay for whatever reason, right, next to each other, and give them equal billing. So now they have 7, 5. I want to give them 6 and 6 on the small. So I want to keep them together like this because I want to maintain the way the article looks for whatever reason. It's wrong, by the way. It should go on top of each other because it's easier to read, right? But maybe I want my aside to come first. That might be something I can do, and I can do that with other little commands, right? But what I want to do is in here, instead of just large 7 and large 5, I want to do something like large 7, small 6, like I did before, right? Here's small 6. Right? And same thing down here, small 6, right? And when I do that, and when I refresh, actually I'll just go back here to the page instead of refreshing all this time. It's going to keep adding more and more of these, right? If I refresh, and in the beginning it doesn't look like anything's different, but as I come closer, oh, now it doesn't go next to each other, it doesn't go on top of each other anymore. It gives them equal billing. Equal amount of space, you see? So you can control how your content reflows by using different classes and using the 12 grid system with Foundation 5. Again, it really depends on how you want your information to flow. Okay? Questions around 12 grid, 12 column grid? These are the basics that we're talking about here. Okay, so, and here's some example of that. Some more example here in my PowerPoint. Even if you don't have it, or if you don't have the, you're not going to watch YouTube. This is the way we can do it. Here's a couple of aside in an article, exactly what we did. Again, medium and large grids, they change as your viewport grows or shrinks, and there's a breakpoint, right? So usually the breakpoint for medium grids, because you can use medium, happens around 768 pixels, and the breakpoint for large grid happens around 980 pixels. So anything less than 980, but greater than 768 approximately, is medium. Anything greater than 980 is large, and anything smaller than 768 is usually small. That's how it goes. Here's combining grids, where you can combine. I just did that already. I combined small and large grids. You can get medium and small. If I don't talk about large, I don't format large at all. And by the way, this is in addition to any other custom CSS you put on your site as well, right? So you can do your own custom CSS, and you need to do this, by the way, to change the colors and the styles and everything else to make it look like your own, right? Because this won't do that for you. This will just do basic alignment. This will create your responsive grid. That's what Foundation does for you. It doesn't color your site or make it beautiful. You got to do that. Okay. What about offset? So you only have one thing to put on there. What you can do is you can use a medium offset or a small offset to give space between columns. An example of that would be this here. I have my main article and I have my aside, right? And you know what? There's only one column space between them, and I want to use another column space. So I want to give this 6. I want to still give this 5 columns, and I want to give an extra space in between of 1, right? Understand? So instead of 7 and 5, I want to make the 6 and 5. 6 and 5 is 11. That means I still have one column I got to play with. I'm going to use that as an offset. And again, the syntax is medium dash offset, or large dash offset, or small dash offset. Wherever you want that extra column, you want to use that extra column to appear. So example, if I put it here, it'll appear to the left of whichever container I apply it to. So if I put it in the beginning, this aside, it'll actually push my aside in by one column. Right? Like actually change my margin, right? Okay, let's check that out. So here's my article and my aside, and you know what? Next to my aside here, I want to add in and on the small side only, instead of 6 and 6, I want to make my aside 6 and 5, right? And I want to put in a small dash offset. And I believe I have to put a number. And let's just check out to make sure that's correct. Okay, so once I've done that, I still add up to 12. 1 small plus 5 small is equal to 6, plus 6 up here is 12. So there's my 12 columns. I got to use all my 12 columns every time in each row container. So here's a row container. Here's another row container. Each row container all the 12 columns got to be used. If you don't use the 12 columns, you get some funky effects. It'll try and figure out what you want, right? And that's not what you want. You want to control your layout, right? Let me respond. And now look what it does. So here's my aside. I'm way out here. And unless I go into large, it gives me this funky space because I'm more than 12 columns. I'm more than 12 columns down here. But once I go into, because I haven't specified large, if I go down to small, I have this extra space now between this. You see what I'm saying? So instead of it being one column, now I have 2 columns between the two, the article and the aside, right? Because I'm using an offset. So typically what I want to do is match up my offset, not just small, but also my large, specify. So large, if I can spell, large offset 1. And you know what? Now that I know that my column is 5, this one is 5, maybe I'll take 1 from here to make this 6. So now my 6 large plus 5 large is 11, plus 1 offset is 12. Okay, so now it all adds up. And I'm going to go back here and refresh. And when I do that on the large side, now I have my separation that I want between my two columns. Make sense? Yeah.
The horizontal level, why is it uneven between the main article and the side?
Because of the H1 tag or H2 tag that I'm using on the left side on my main article and the H3 tag that I'm using on my side. They have different space, and you can adjust that with CSS. So you'd have to go there with your own custom CSS and say, add additional margin of blah blah, whatever and you probably have to give your article an ID, or your side an ID for that tag, so you can specifically target that particular ID that you want to give it extra space. Or maybe you want to make it so all H3 tags have extra space that match up with the other ones. You know, it's up to you. It's your design, right? Any questions around this stuff? Are people foggy about what I'm doing here? All I'm doing is I'm taking my 12 columns. I've got 10 fingers. Sorry, I don't have 12 fingers. So imagine if I have 12 fingers here. I'm for the people on YouTube, watching YouTube, I'm putting my hands up, right? I've got my 12 fingers, right? And my column, my rows go this way. And I'm saying, for this row, I want 4 of my columns to be for my article, and the other 5, my other portion of for my other article. There's 2 articles happening. One article on this side, one article on this side, maybe some pictures, and I want to split up the number of columns in terms of pixels, right, between one and another, so that my content flows the way I want across different viewport sizes, across 3 sizes, large, medium, and small, and I can specify each one. Chances are you don't want to do every single one because it's really draconic. Like you're going to do large and medium, what it looks like on tablet, and then small. Sometimes all you need is large and small, or medium and small, depending on what you're putting in there. Sometimes you don't need small at all, depending on what else you put in there, right? If you don't specify, it defaults, right, to, if you have something on the large side, it defaults to layering one on top of the other. So all it's going to do is just going to kind of put one thing on top of the other thing. Okay. So that's what the offset does. How about centering? So if I center it, all I'm doing is, especially if I'm using, it takes the element that I want, not the text, but the whole element, and centers it inside of that the column break. So for example, if I have 6 columns and I have my aside, right, and some of it's pushed up on my left, the text itself won't be centered, right? I might have the actual element will be centered, which kind of creates a weird, kind of effect, because it just centers the actual element, not the text. And sometimes you need to do that. And you can use that by saying large centered or medium centered. You want to center a particular thing. And sometimes you don't do that with other things. Like for example, when you go to small, maybe you don't want it centered. Maybe you want it on the left side or whatever. And you can specify that as well. You can also nest your grids. I'm not going to go into that right now. But for example, you can have a row, right? Here's an example of a row on the outside, right? Here's the outside row, right? And inside there you have medium 6 columns. And here's your medium 6 columns down here. So that's 12 columns. And inside of there you have another row. Here's a second row that's layered inside the first one. And you have some pictures with medium 4, 4, and 4. Right? So you have 4 different pictures, 3 different pictures, layered across 12 columns, each one of them getting 4 of their own. Again, this is just simply a way of laying out your design. Yeah?
Why is there 12 columns?
This is the way that the 12-column grid system is a system the Foundation uses, so that way when we're going to respond to different viewport sizes, you can specify how many columns each of your elements or your content areas are going to take up.
So it's always 12.
And this, you can make it as many as you want. If you go to the website, you can specify 15, different break, a 10, a 9, you know what, but they all have to add up. And once you do that, you have to specify custom classes. So I go with 12, so there's no work to do, right? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And all I'm saying is 12 column grid. And most, by the way, most systems, even Bootstrap uses a 12 column grid, right? So it makes sense. It's something that works out with most web pages and most devices, all right? So nested grids work, but the block grid really works well for pictures, right? So here's an example. I say medium block grid 3, right? And what medium block grid 3 means is I'm going to take 3 images across, and I'm just using here, I'm using some islands in the Greek islands here, right? So I got Aegina, Crete, Kos, Mykonos, Santorini, and Zakynthos, a few islands in the Greek, in Greece, right? And images of these things. And what I'm doing is I'm using a medium block 3 to put these images across, 3 across. And I'm layering them within the 12 grid system. So it's almost like a nesting. And I like this way when you use your block grid for pictures as opposed to, like, for example, a gallery. I'd rather use the block grid than nesting it with separate columns. It's a little better. So it's better than doing this. This is the same thing, but I'm using my 12 columns, and I got example, this section has 4 columns where I have my image. This is 4 and this is 4, whereas here I don't specify how much it is. It's going to reflow on its own. It's using its own custom images, custom class, and I'm just specifying how many images I want across. I want 3 images across every time.
So each image is a third of the width of the page.
Correct. Only for medium. Medium, right, block grid 3. I can say for small, block grid 2, because it makes sense that it would reflow, or maybe or no block grid. Don't even specify. I want them one on top of the other for small.
That would increase the size of the image.
Correct. Right, so let's try that out. Yeah. What was that?
It would only be in the large 9 set, or no, 'cause
It's inside this half.
how would that
So
affect, because it's for medium, but that says large.
correct, because what you're doing is you're nesting it. You're saying, so I've got 9 real columns. Out of these 9, I'm going to take 1/3 of the 9 columns, because now you've got 12 columns inside the 9 columns. You're further dividing it. That's what you're doing, right? So you want more granular control, right? So all you're doing is saying, inside these 9 columns, I've got 1/3 of them is going to be each of the images. That's what it's doing, right? For medium only. So let's try this out. So again, I've got some image placeholders, right? I've got my, here's my main article, and there's a lot of words here. I'm going to chop some of these words up, right? Just so that way it's not there's not as many. I'm just going to go like this, and the same thing goes here. I'm just going to chop some of these words apart. Let's just do one of these, right? So the update looks like this, just so you can see it all on one page, right? And then underneath here, I'm going to put some images here on this side, right? So I'm going to say under the main article, I want a few of my placeholder images, right? So here's my main article. There's my main article. And underneath my p tag, right in here, I want to put some placeholder images. So I'm going to say, first I want to define my div tag, so div, right? And inside there, I want to have a class of block or medium block grid. I think it's medium dash block, if I can remember how it is. I think I remember. My brain is a jumbled mess, my friends. Medium dash block dash grid dash 3. All right, so there's the div tag, right? And inside the div tag, I'm going to add in there a bunch of these placeholder images. So I'm going to go something like pics dash, and they're going to be, let's say, 150 by 150, right? And it's going to be business, right? And you know what? I'm going to do that again and again. So pics dash 150 by 150 business. And see how it takes another one? 6 and 9. That's different images. And if I hover over them, it actually shows you what they are, right? But to be fast, I'm going to just copy it a bunch of times and change the numbers. So there's 6 of them, and maybe I'll make this a 1. I'll make this a 2. I'm just changing the images that are coming up randomly. 3, and maybe an 8. And if I do that now, right, if I've done it correctly, there's a bunch of different images that come up inside my block grid. And when I run this thing, if I've done it correctly, there they are. Make sense? Now when I go down here like this, if I start skimming down to the small size, I haven't said anything about small. So what happens when I do small? Every time they go one on top of the other. I haven't specified what small does. So small, the default thing for small is they just put one thing on top of the other, which is kind of ugly. Maybe I want 2 across, which means they'll be pretty small, like pretty tiny, right? So let's go back up to the full size again.
Is it possible to make the images bigger as you decrease the size of the page?
There's all kinds of control, man. I'm just showing you that. I'm scratching the surface here with you today. That's all I'm doing, right? And if you read the documentation for the API, for the framework, there's all kinds of control you can use, right? Built in. Again, this is like using 0 of my own CSS, right? I haven't used 0 coding right now. And all I've done is kind of implanted the framework. That's all I'm using right now. That's why it's so powerful, right? And you can make it look like your own. So medium block grid 3, let's say for small, right? I'll go small dash block dash grid dash 2, right? I want 2 across for small. It's going to be really small though, right? Because they're going to really shrink even more. And if I refresh, here's what it looks like for medium. And as I come closer, when I go small, if it's trying, right? It's trying, but it can't. There's just 2 because it's trying to maintain my size ratio, right? So again, the challenge that we're trying to do here is we're trying to reflow this stuff. Now, honestly, you know what? A lot of this would probably look better at the bottom of my screen. So be underneath all this stuff. So it's easy to do that. I just got to take all this stuff out. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to take all this stuff out, like I said, and then we'll be done for the day, okay? I won't keep you. I know I'm keeping you all the way to the end. I apologize. Some of you want to take off and have lunch. I want to add in another div tag with a class of 12 or large 12 columns, right? There's my div tag. And inside my div tag, I'm going to place all that stuff, right? Which is right here. Right, so large 12 columns. This whole thing is taken up. It's underneath my article. And when I refresh, my pictures are much bigger. And they span, because I said medium, right, and not large, they span right across for large. Right? But when I go into medium, when I cut to medium, right, when I make that cut, it goes to 3. Right? And they go right across my article, right? Because that's what they do. Okay? Oh, I did forget one thing. I have to make an outer wrapper with a thing of row. Oops. That I got to put all this inside. Because if I don't do that, it doesn't recognize it as a foundation thing. It doesn't respond properly. There it goes. Okay. And if you notice, there's a little bit of space between them. If you wanted to add more space, you can do that. There's all kinds of little control elements that you can put in. So that's it for today, kind of an intro to Foundation. We'll do more next week, and I think I have all the stuff online for you to read anyway.